I'm here in San Antonio for NAREIT's REITwise, our 2019 Law, Accounting, and Finance Conference. Joining me today is Tara Marszewski, Chief Financial Officer with Brookfield Properties Retail Group. Tara, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, here at REITwise, you moderated a session on data analytics and cybersecurity. How important is it, in your opinion, that companies annually train their workforce on these issues?
I think that annually training the workforce is probably the most important thing outside of the actual technology. As we discussed with the panelists, all of them each individually said that their employees and the workforce are sort of the gateway to most cyber incidents, and I think it's very important to train people. There's always a concept of cyber fatigue and training fatigue. We can always overtrain our employees, give them too many emails about the latest cyber trend. One thing I think that we try to do at Brookfield Properties Retail Group is try to make cyber about training. So we do annual phishing exercises, testing of access and things like that, but also make it cultural with the technology. So employees always have it top of mind and aren't constantly bombarded with training, but they do know that we have simple things like a policy around taking your laptop home, right, versus leaving it out on your desk all night, right? Take your laptop home, put it away, avoids just the most basic, theft and cyber attack. We also have policies around multi-factor authentication, so employees know that when they're not on their network in the office, that they can get their information, but there is a level of security, so it always is ever present in what they're doing. Sort of the cyber concept is always ever present in what they're doing. It is very important to make sure employees are aware.
And what are some of the biggest challenges that companies face in complying with the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR?
GDPR. Now, GDPR isn't something that we have had to really face at Brookfield Properties, the retail group here, because we're generally all US-based, although we did have to go through the process of making sure that was true. I think that a couple of things I can think of for US-based companies like us, I think it is making sure that you actually you don't comply or you don't fall into those regulations, I think is one thing. There are sources of data, vendors, and other things that you might not think about that could scope you into GDPR. So I think that's important. And then for companies out there complying, I think it is very difficult to get a handle on all the information, right? A lot of the companies that need to comply with it are decentralized or disaggregated, such that they have disparate systems that aren't always talking to one another. So making sure they understand all the data and all the data that could be subject to GDPR is a huge hurdle, I think, for everyone. And
lastly, you talked in the first answer about the importance of training, but what are some other steps that a REIT can take to mitigate its exposure to cyber attacks?
Again, training I think is key. I think setting up a system of monitoring and responsiveness to monitoring of cyber instances is huge. We at Brookfield have had a couple very minor ransomware issues where they've spanned the spectrum as far as our ability to identify and respond to them, because we were probably more in the infancy of our cyber evolution when these happened, but we have had incidents where we noticed the ransom attack immediately based on probably what it held hostage. And then there's also been ones where it's gone a few days before we noticed it. So I think when we implemented our cyber program, one thing that was very important to us was, okay, how are we going to be made aware of the incidents is great, but then how long is it going to take us to respond to the incident? Because I think that is one thing that is critical. Like, you can get all the data about what's happened, but your ability to respond and effectively resolve a breach, or even decide if it is a breach, is very important. It's a critical next step.
Great. Tara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For more information on this and other REIT news and analysis, be sure to visit NAREIT's website, REIT.com.